I never expected to hear a bark that shattered the silence of a cold, indifferent night, a bark that should have been impossible. I still remember the shock that seized my heart as I stepped out of bed, convinced that my senses were betraying me. It was a sound so raw and unexpected that it pulled me from the depths of uneasy sleep into a reality that I could neither fathom nor immediately dismiss. It had been weeks since we had said our final goodbye to Max, our loyal companion, whose warm eyes and gentle spirit had once filled our modest home with an inexplicable joy. The day of his burial was etched into my memory as one of the most painful yet strangely quiet moments in my life, a moment when sorrow and routine collided. I had been present as my family, gathered in a muted procession, laid him to rest in the little garden behind our house, a place we had chosen because it felt intimate and secluded. We had whispered our farewells, shared memories of playful afternoons and silent comfort, and then, as if in a final act of resignation, we had covered him with earth. It was a practical goodbye, devoid of theatrics, yet heavy with an unspoken promise that life would continue despite our loss. But that night, as the moon hung low and the air bore the chill of autumn's first frost, something was terribly off. I had been tossing and turning when a peculiar sound, a low, resonant bark, had pried my consciousness from its fragile state. The sound was not the echo of a dream or the fragment of a half-remembered nightmare. It was real and jarringly present, a call that seemed to vibrate with a mixture of longing and accusation. Compelled by a force I could neither name nor resist, I dressed quickly and slipped out into the darkness. The narrow street was shrouded in shadows, the outlines of familiar houses blurred into ghostly silhouettes. Every step I took toward the source of that haunting bark felt like a descent into a world where the past and the present collided in an unsettling embrace. The quiet was punctuated only by the rhythmic crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant, irregular hum of a city that had long since surrendered its secrets to the night. As I neared our backyard, the very spot where we had laid Max to rest, I was hit by an overwhelming wave of dread. The familiar scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, which on ordinary days brought a sense of peaceful nostalgia, now reeked of something unnervingly foreign. I paused at the edge of the garden, my eyes straining to pierce the darkness, half expecting to see some sign of life among the carefully arranged mounds of freshly turned soil. But the garden was still, and the silence that followed was almost more terrifying than the bark itself. I remember how my mind raced through a series of impossibilities. Had someone disturbed his grave? Was it some cruel prank? Or worse, was there a hidden truth buried beneath our deliberate act of mourning? With trembling hands, I knelt near the mound, the cool night air mingling with the sweat on my skin, and gently brushed away the loose earth. What I found was not the familiar, worn collar of a long-lost pet, but an absence that seemed to mock the finality of our farewell. There was no sign that Max had ever been here at all, at least, nothing that could be immediately explained by human mischief or a simple error in memory. In the days that followed, the image of that disturbed soil haunted me. I tried to shake the feeling that I had unwittingly stepped into a narrative far darker and more complex than the simple grief of losing a pet. Each time I passed by that spot, I couldn't help but feel that some hidden truth was silently waiting to reveal itself. My family, too, seemed to sense that something was amiss, though none of us had the courage to voice it. We continued our daily routines, burying our sorrow beneath layers of mundane tasks, yet the tension simmered beneath the surface like a warning that refused to be ignored. The next morning, I found myself driving along a winding road that led to a small park, a place where, as a child, I had once chased the wind and shared secrets with the trees. Today, that park felt transformed into a stage for an unscripted drama, where every rustle of leaves and every fleeting shadow whispered of secrets best left unspoken. I parked the car near a cluster of ancient oaks, their gnarled branches twisting skyward as if in silent supplication. The park was nearly deserted, its usual midday calm replaced by a heavy, expectant stillness. I walked slowly along the worn paths, my eyes darting from one curious detail to another. A lone bench, splattered with the remnants of old graffiti, a shattered glass bottle half buried in the dirt, and, most disconcertingly, an inexplicable series of paw prints that seemed too deliberate to be random. The prints led me to the edge of a small clearing where the light of the sun fought valiantly against the shadows. There, as if by design, I discovered a clue that reignited my internal turmoil, a worn-out dog tag lying incongruously amidst a bed of wildflowers. My heart hammered in my chest as I picked it up, the cold metal a stark reminder of what I had lost. The tag was unmistakably Max's, its engraving faded but legible. Yet, as I held it in my hand, a terrible thought began to creep into my mind. If Max had truly been gone, buried in our backyard, how could his tag have ended up here in the park? Every rational explanation fell short against the mounting evidence that something was gravely wrong. My rational mind wrestled with the absurdity of it all, a misplaced tag, a disturbed grave, and now, inexplicable paw prints that led away from both. Returning home, I found my family gathered in the kitchen, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and worry that mirrored my own. The house, usually a sanctuary of warmth and predictability, now felt like the setting of an unfolding mystery. My younger sister, normally so quick with a laugh, sat silently at the table, her eyes red from unshed tears. My father's furrowed brow and my mother's tight-lipped concern spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. Over dinner, the conversation circled around everyday matters, but beneath the surface, each of us grappled with an unspoken dread. The familiar clink of cutlery and the soft hum of the refrigerator seemed to accentuate the strain, each mundane sound a reminder of the fragile barrier between what was known and what lurked just beyond our perception. I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were poised on the brink of a revelation, one that would forever alter our understanding of loss, memory, and the boundaries between life and death. That night, sleep eluded me as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying the events over and over in my mind. The vivid images of the disturbed earth, the solitary park bench, and those deliberate paw prints intertwined into a surreal tapestry that defied simple explanation. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Max's face, so full of quiet innocence, and the subtle, inexplicable glimmer in his eyes that seemed to hint at an unspoken message. Was it a desperate plea for help, or a final, cryptic farewell from beyond the grave? I turned to my journal, a habit that had often provided solace during times of inner turmoil. I scribbled down every detail, every fleeting thought, trying to capture the intangible fear that had taken root in my soul. My handwriting trembled on the page as I wrote about the sense of betrayal I felt, not just by fate, but by the very laws of nature that had seemed to defy themselves that night. How could something so ordinary, so rooted in the fabric of daily life, unravel into a sequence of events that felt both profoundly personal and disturbingly surreal? The following morning brought no answers, only more questions. I revisited the backyard where Max had been laid to rest, determined to find some clue that might reconcile the dissonance between my memories and the physical evidence before me. The garden was bathed in the gentle light of dawn, each dewdrop clinging to the blades of grass like tiny crystals of hope. Yet, despite the serene beauty of the scene, an undercurrent of dread persisted, as if the very earth were harboring a secret too terrible to be revealed. I traced the outline of the disturbed mound with my fingertips, feeling the cool, damp soil that had once cradled Maximum. The sensation was both familiar and jarring, a tactile reminder of the finality of loss. But this time, something was different. Where I had expected the comforting solidity of closure, I instead felt an unsettling hollowness, as if the grave itself had been tampered with. My mind raced with theories that were both impossible and inconceivable, each one chipping away at the foundations of my carefully constructed reality. As I left the garden that day, I couldn't help but feel that I was standing at the threshold of a mystery that defied logic, a mystery that had begun with a single, provocative bark and was now spiraling into territories I had never dared to imagine. The juxtaposition of our everyday life with the unfolding enigma was as jarring as it was irresistible, pulling me deeper into a labyrinth of unanswered questions and mounting dread. I knew that the coming days would force me to confront not only the secrets hidden in the silent corners of our home, but also the deeper truths buried within my own heart. And as I drove away, the image of Max's collar in my hand burned like a fading ember, a symbol of a past that refused to be forgotten and a future that promised nothing less than the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. The ordinary had become extraordinary in the most unsettling of ways, and as I navigated the familiar streets with a newfound wariness, I could not shake the sensation that every shadow, every whispered rustle of leaves, held the promise of an answer, a revelation that would come at a cost. I was caught between the comfort of routine and the inexorable pull of the unknown, a place where the line between memory and reality blurred into something altogether unrecognizable. In that moment, standing alone under the indifferent gaze of a winter sky, I realized that our lives are often a tapestry woven with threads of both light and darkness. And sometimes, just when you think you've learned to live with the pain of loss, fate, or perhaps something far more inscrutable, delivers a reminder that the past is never truly gone. That night, the restless echoes of the day's revelations kept me from sleep. In the silence of our old, creaking house, every sound took on an unnerving quality, the soft tapping of rain against the window, the distant hum of a car engine on a nearly empty street, all conspiring to amplify the feeling that something was amiss. I found myself pacing the darkened halls, haunted by the memory of that disrupted grave and the chilling discovery of Max's lost collar. Each step was a reminder that even the most familiar corners of our world could harbor secrets too profound to ignore. Morning came reluctantly, as if the day itself sensed the weight of the unspoken mystery. I resolved to revisit the park, drawn back by the inexplicable pull of those deliberate paw prints. The park, now bathed in the soft glow of early light, seemed to have shifted from a place of nostalgic memories to a stage for unsolved puzzles. I retraced my steps along the winding, leaf-strewn paths, my eyes scanning every detail. The bench where I had found the worn dog tag now appeared even more forlorn, as if it too carried the burden of a story left unfinished. Nearby, a series of faint, fresh paw prints, smaller and more erratic this time, led me toward a neglected corner of the park where nature had begun to reclaim what man had forgotten. I followed the trail until it ended at a narrow, overgrown alleyway behind a row of abandoned storefronts. The air here was heavy, with a mixture of damp decay and a scent that I couldn't quite place, a pungent, almost metallic tang that clung to the shadows. Every step forward felt like I was trespassing deeper into a hidden narrative, one that defied the simple logic of loss and mourning. I crouched down to examine the prints closely, noting how they meandered and forked unpredictably. They were too precise, almost as if they were deliberately arranged to lead me somewhere specific. My pulse quickened with the realization that these tracks might not belong to any ordinary stray dog, but rather to something, or someone, intent on unraveling the comfortable order of everyday life. The tension in my chest was a constant companion as I lingered there, caught between the desire to understand and the fear of what I might uncover. I took out my phone to snap a few photos, trying to capture every detail for later scrutiny, though a part of me hesitated, wondering if documenting these moments was inviting an unknown presence into my life. The contrast between the park's innocent daylight beauty and the creeping unease of this hidden trail was jarring, a stark reminder that even the most benign settings could conceal layers of mystery. The alleyway, with its graffiti-smeared walls and broken remnants of forgotten commerce, seemed to whisper of secrets that had long been buried beneath the veneer of urban decay. As I turned back toward the main path, a sudden movement in the periphery of my vision made my heart leap. A figure, a fleeting silhouette, darted behind a cluster of shrubs. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure moved with an odd, deliberate grace, its form indistinct in the shifting light. It could have been a passerby or perhaps another stray animal drawn by the same inexplicable magnetism that had ensnared me. Yet, in that moment, I couldn't shake the sensation that this was a harbinger of something deeper, an omen that tethered the mundane to a realm of hidden truths. I followed, cautious yet compelled, the figure as it led me further down the labyrinthine alleys of the park. The pursuit wasn't driven by malicious intent, but by a desperate need to understand the strange convergence of events, a family's grief, a disturbed grave, and a trail of clues that defied the boundaries of normalcy. The quiet intensity of the chase left me both exhilarated and terrified, caught in the interplay of light and shadow, certainty and doubt. Every step echoed in my mind like the ticking of an unseen clock, marking the passage of time as I ventured deeper into an unfolding drama. Emerging from the alley, I found myself in a small, forgotten courtyard, a place that seemed to have been walled off from the rest of the park, as if protecting some clandestine secret. The courtyard was a study in contrasts, a patchwork of wild, untamed flora interspersed with fragments of crumbling stone and rusted metal. In the center, an old, ornate fountain stood as a relic of a bygone era, its water long since ceased to flow freely, now a stagnant pool that mirrored the dark sky above. Here, the air was thicker, almost suffocating, imbued with the weight of stories that had never been told. I stepped forward, every instinct screaming that this was a nexus, a point where the threads of the past and the present were intricately entwined. Kneeling beside the fountain, I traced my fingers over the worn carvings on its base. The textures told tales of forgotten craftsmanship and faded glory, much like the memories of a life now marked by loss. And yet, amidst the decay, there was an undeniable pulse of something alive, a murmur of defiance against the silence that had enveloped it. I sat there for long minutes, lost in thought, as the mingling scents of damp stone and rust seemed to whisper of a connection between Max's abrupt disappearance and the eerie, persistent signs that had led me here. In that stillness, I began to document every sensation: the cool, rough surface of the fountain, the sudden rush of wind that stirred the stagnant water, and the distant, muffled sounds of the city beyond the walls. It was as if the courtyard was alive, speaking in riddles through its textures and smells. I wondered if my relentless search for answers was the catalyst that had awakened this dormant space, stirring memories of loss and longing that had been suppressed for far too long. The stark, unsettling dichotomy of everyday reality and the unexplained was becoming impossible to ignore, weaving together the tangible and the inexplicable into a tapestry that both captivated and unsettled me. Leaving the courtyard with a mix of reluctance and determination, I felt the heavy pull of responsibility, not only to uncover the truth behind Max's inexplicable reappearance, but also to confront the deeper, more personal implications of this mystery. As I retraced my steps back to the park's main trail, the image of the silhouette and the echo of its silent message lingered in my mind. It was a reminder that some secrets, once uncovered, could shatter the fragile illusion of normalcy, leaving in their wake a trail of questions that threatened to unravel the very fabric of our existence. Back at home, the atmosphere was charged with a silent intensity. My family, though struggling to maintain a semblance of routine, could not ignore the palpable tension that had seeped into every corner of our lives. Over a quiet, uneasy breakfast, our eyes met in unspoken understanding, each of us aware that the events of the past days were merely the beginning of a journey into a realm where the boundaries of grief, memory, and reality blurred disturbingly. There was a collective, wordless agreement that we would have to face whatever revelations lay ahead, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the past we thought we had left behind. The day stretched out before me like an unwritten chapter, filled with both the promise of mundane distractions and the persistent pull of the mystery that refused to be silenced. I spent the afternoon methodically revisiting every location that had played a role in these surreal events, retracing my steps with a careful, almost clinical precision. At each site, the disturbed garden, the graffiti-lined alley, the secluded courtyard, I gathered fragments of evidence, piecing together an enigmatic puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with every detail. Yet, for all my efforts, the bigger picture remained elusive, its edges blurred by the interplay of memory, emotion, and the inexplicable. In quiet moments, I couldn't help but wonder if our actions that fateful day, burial, farewell, the silent acceptance of loss, had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that was now spiraling into something far beyond our control. The subtle cracks in our everyday life, once invisible, now seemed to radiate from that single moment of grief, casting long shadows over our existence. It was as if the universe, in its indifferent way, had decided to challenge our understanding of closure and continuity, forcing us to confront a reality where the lines between past and present, life and death, were dangerously blurred. Even as the day waned into a murky twilight, a sense of foreboding clung to me like a second skin. The gentle hum of the neighborhood and the familiar rhythm of daily life were overlaid with an undercurrent of tension, a reminder that the extraordinary could be lurking just beneath the surface of the ordinary. I returned to my room, not for rest but for solace in writing, pouring my scattered thoughts into my journal. Every word was a desperate attempt to capture the elusive, mounting anxiety that had become my constant companion. I wrote of the blurred boundaries, the surreal encounters, and the persistent question that refused to be silenced: what if the past is never truly gone, but rather waiting in the wings to reclaim its place in our lives? As darkness finally enveloped the day, I lay awake with the ink still drying on my journal pages, each line a testament to a reality that had shifted irrevocably. The sensation of being caught between two worlds, the known, measured life of everyday routine, and the chaotic, unpredictable realm of hidden truths was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. I could only hope that, in time, the answers would come, and with them, a sense of closure that might one day restore the delicate balance we had lost. Until then, I remained suspended in that liminal space, acutely aware that every quiet moment might be the precursor to a revelation that would challenge everything I believed about life, loss, and the thin veil that separates the living from the memories left behind. I never imagined that the relentless whispers of that unyielding mystery would soon tear open the fragile seams of our everyday lives. Yet, as dusk bled into night and the cold crept insidiously through the cracks of our old house, the line between memory and nightmare blurred into an unbearable haze. The following morning, I awoke to the sound of hushed voices in the kitchen, a quiet murmur that spoke of furtive conversations and tentative reconciliations. My father sat at the table with his eyes fixed on the untouched cup of coffee, his face etched with lines of sorrow and concern that had deepened since that fateful night. My mother moved about in a trance-like state, her hands busy with small, almost desperate tasks, as if trying to hold together the shattered remnants of our home. Even my younger sister, usually a beacon of unbridled hope, now exuded an air of apprehension, her gaze distant and clouded with questions too heavy for her tender years. I joined them at the table, the silence thick and suffocating as we exchanged glances that carried the weight of shared dread. The events of the past days, Max's disturbing reappearance, the eerie traces left behind in our neighborhood, and the inexplicable disturbances that defied the boundaries of rational thought, had carved deep scars in all of us. We were bound by grief and uncertainty, each of us grappling with the realization that our simple act of bidding farewell had unleashed a torrent of anomalies that refused to be contained. After breakfast, I decided to return to the park once more. The unresolved mystery demanded answers, and though every instinct urged caution, a stubborn determination propelled me forward. I retraced the paths that had already become etched into my mind, the abandoned alleyway, the secluded courtyard with its frozen fountain, and the distorted echoes of familiar locations now tainted by an undercurrent of the surreal. Each step was accompanied by a chorus of memories, a relentless reminder of what had been lost and what now might be stolen away. As I ventured deeper into the park, the morning light fought to penetrate the lingering mist that hung over the landscape like a shroud. The dew on the grass sparkled briefly before succumbing to the inevitable decay of the day. My eyes kept darting between the vibrant, natural beauty of the scene and the subtle, almost imperceptible signs of disturbance that marred its perfection, a displaced stone here, an inexplicably moved shrub there. It was as if the park itself was trying to signal something, to reveal a hidden truth that lay just beyond my reach. I soon found myself drawn back to the overgrown alleyway where I had previously witnessed that enigmatic silhouette. The alley, once a mere passageway between crumbling storefronts, now seemed transformed into a corridor of secrets. The walls, adorned with layers of peeling graffiti and faded advertisements, bore silent witness to decades of neglect and forgotten stories. I moved cautiously, my every step measured and deliberate, aware that the mundane could twist into something sinister at any moment. Halfway down the alley, I caught sight of a flash of movement, a deliberate, almost ritualistic gesture that sent a shiver coursing down my spine. I paused, heart pounding, as I tried to focus on the shape that darted into a darkened doorway. The figure was too elusive, too swift, yet it left behind a residue of familiarity that made my pulse race. The realization struck me with the force of a thunderclap. This was no mere stray or random wanderer. It was as if someone, or something, was deliberately orchestrating this unsettling spectacle, drawing me into a web of secrets from which there was no easy escape. Driven by a mix of fear and an insatiable need for understanding, I pressed on, following the vague outline of the figure through a labyrinth of narrow corridors and forgotten rooms. The building, once a modest relic of a bygone era, exuded an air of quiet desolation. Dust motes danced in the narrow beams of light that penetrated the grimy windows, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the halls like a heartbeat. In one room, strewn with broken furniture and layers of decaying wallpaper, I discovered an old photograph pinned to the wall, a snapshot of a happy family, smiling with a naive joy that now seemed incongruous in the shadow of our current despair. The photograph, though faded and creased by time, resonated with a strange sense of déjà vu. I could almost see Max's gentle eyes reflected in the innocent smiles, as if he had been a silent witness to a happier past that had long since been buried beneath the weight of sorrow. Clutching the photograph, I felt a surge of determination to unravel the mystery further. There was an undeniable connection between the relics of the past and the disturbing events unfolding around me. I was beginning to suspect that the reappearance of Max was not an isolated incident, but rather a manifestation of a deeper, more intricate interplay between memory, guilt, and the unresolved echoes of loss. Each seemingly insignificant detail, the displaced earth in our backyard, the stray dog tag found in the park, the shadowed figure darting between the ruins, was a piece of a puzzle that defied conventional explanation. Emerging back into the open, I was struck by the sharp contrast between the decaying urban labyrinth and the natural beauty of the park. The boundary between these two worlds was as thin as a sheet of ice, fragile yet capable of shattering under the weight of hidden truths. I wandered along a meandering path lined with ancient trees, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead to form a natural archway that felt like a portal to another realm. The rustle of leaves underfoot and the occasional chirp of a distant bird were the only reminders of life amidst the creeping decay. Yet, beneath this veneer of calm, an undercurrent of dread pulsed steadily, an unspoken promise that nothing was as it seemed. My thoughts returned repeatedly to the inexplicable reappearance of Max, an event that seemed to challenge the very laws of nature and the finality of our grief. Was it possible that the act of burying him had somehow disturbed a balance we were never meant to tamper with? The notion was as absurd as it was terrifying, a reflection of the chaotic intersection between our emotional lives and the mysterious forces that governed fate. Every new clue, every disjointed fragment of evidence, pointed toward a reality where the boundaries between life and death, loss and memory, were perilously thin. Later that afternoon, as I sat in the quiet solitude of my room, the photograph of the smiling family lay on my desk, a silent testament to the passage of time and the fleeting nature of joy. The room itself, once a sanctuary of familiar comforts, now felt haunted by the weight of questions that begged for answers. I stared at the image for long minutes, lost in thought, until a sudden noise, the soft click of a door closing, snapped me back to the present. It was an insignificant sound, yet in that moment it resonated like a death knell, a reminder that the past was never truly dead. I found my family gathered in the living room later that evening, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of a television screen that played a mindless show meant to distract us from the tension that filled the air. The normalcy of the scene was jarring, an unwelcome interruption in a day dominated by surreal discoveries and creeping dread. My mother's eyes met mine across the room, and for a brief moment I saw in them the unspoken acknowledgement of our shared burden, a burden that was slowly consuming us, piece by piece. My father's hands, usually so steady and resolute, trembled ever so slightly as he fumbled with a newspaper, his mind clearly elsewhere. Even my sister, who often tried to infuse levity into our troubled home, was subdued, her laughter a distant memory. Unable to contain the swirling tempest of emotions any longer, I finally spoke. My voice, though soft and tentative, carried the weight of a truth too urgent to be silenced. I recounted my journey through the park, the eerie encounter in the alley, and the discovery of that haunting photograph, a series of events that, when woven together, painted a picture far more disturbing than any of us had dared to imagine. I spoke of the unsettling feeling that the boundary between life and death was not as definitive as we believed, and of the inexplicable pull that seemed to tether us to the past, to a grief that was both personal and universal. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken emotions and fears too profound for words. My father's eyes, normally so resolute, glistened with tears as he slowly nodded, acknowledging the possibility that our loss was not merely a chapter in our lives, but a lingering presence that refused to fade away. My mother reached out, her hand trembling as it rested on mine, offering a silent promise of shared strength even as the specter of our loss loomed large. And my sister, her eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and fragile hope, whispered a single, tentative word, "What if?" That single word, pregnant with possibility and dread alike, echoed in my mind long after the conversation had ended. It was a question that encapsulated our deepest fears. What if the boundaries we believed in were nothing more than illusions? What if, in the act of burying our beloved Max, we had inadvertently unleashed forces that now demanded to be reckoned with? As night fell again, I found myself standing at the threshold of our home, staring out into the darkness as if it held the answers to questions I was too afraid to ask. The familiar landscape of our neighborhood was shrouded in an eerie quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by a suffocating stillness. It was in that moment that I realized the true horror lay not in the supernatural or the inexplicable, but in the stark confrontation with our own mortality and the relentless persistence of memory. The pain of loss, I now understood, was not something that could be neatly buried or consigned to the past. It was a living, breathing force, an echo that resonated through every corner of our existence, transforming the ordinary into something achingly surreal. In the days that followed, our family began to confront the mystery in ways that were both deliberate and desperate. We organized quiet, solemn gatherings in the backyard, not just to remember Max, but to attempt to exorcise the disquieting specter of guilt and confusion that had taken root. Each conversation, each shared silence, was a tentative step toward understanding the inexplicable pull that had led us into this labyrinth of unresolved emotions and hidden truths. I dedicated long hours to my journal, filling its pages with the raw, unfiltered accounts of my experiences. Every detail, no matter how minute, was recorded with a fervor that bordered on obsession. I wrote of the tactile sensations of disturbed soil, the resonant echo of stray barks in the dead of night, and the piercing clarity of images that danced just at the edge of consciousness. The words flowed from me like an urgent confession, a desperate attempt to capture the intangible and make sense of a reality that had suddenly become foreign and fraught with peril. There were moments when the weight of it all nearly broke me, a crushing realization that our lives, our memories, were now intertwined with forces that defied all conventional wisdom. In the quiet isolation of my room, I stared at the blank pages of my journal, the silence punctuated by the steady drip of rain against the window pane. Each droplet seemed to carry with it a fragment of a forgotten past, a whisper of a secret too profound to articulate. It was in those moments that I truly felt the inescapable presence of something larger than ourselves, a force that demanded recognition, no matter how painful the truth might be. As I ventured out into the cold, unforgiving night, I carried with me the burden of those revelations. The once comforting glow of streetlights now cast long, distorted shadows that danced ominously on the pavement, each one a ghostly reminder of the blurred line between our world and the inexplicable. The familiar route to our home had become a gauntlet of unsettling visions, a symphony of discordant images that played in the periphery of my vision, threatening to shatter the fragile veneer of normalcy. In the darkness, as I finally reached our doorstep, I couldn't help but wonder if the mysteries we were unraveling were merely the surface of something far more complex and terrifying. The reappearance of Max, the disturbed grave, the enigmatic trails and relics, they were all pieces of a puzzle that beckoned us to confront not only our loss, but the very nature of life and death itself. And as I stepped into the quiet sanctuary of our home, I knew that the journey was far from over. The story that had begun with a provocative bark and the silent burying of a beloved pet was evolving into a saga of grief, revelation, and a creeping realization that some truths refused to remain hidden. In that moment, amidst the somber quiet of our living room, I resolved to press on, no matter how harrowing the path might be. The answers, elusive as they were, beckoned like a distant light in the darkness, a promise of understanding, even if it meant confronting the deepest, most unsettling aspects of our own humanity. And as the night deepened around us, I felt, with a mixture of dread and determination, that our family was poised on the brink of a discovery that would forever alter the tapestry of our lives, weaving together the threads of loss, memory, and a reality that was as brutal as it was inexplicable. In the days that followed our intense family gathering, the oppressive haze of unanswered questions began to press in on us from every side. The atmosphere in our home grew heavy with unspoken confessions and desperate hopes that somewhere, hidden beneath layers of grief and regret, lay the key to unlocking the mystery of Max's inexplicable return. I felt compelled to confront the truth head-on, even if doing so meant unraveling parts of my past that I had long tried to keep buried. One chilly evening, when the wind outside howled like a forlorn lament, I found myself drawn once more to the garden where Max had been laid to rest. The moon was a thin crescent in the sky, casting feeble light over the familiar mound. My heart pounded as I knelt by the disturbed earth, its texture still altered by the memory of that first, shocking night. I ran my fingers over the soil, feeling an odd emptiness where I had expected to sense the lingering warmth of his presence. In that moment, a realization began to crystallize. Perhaps our desperate need for closure had warped our perceptions. Had we, in our profound grief, rewritten our own narrative, burying not only Max's body but also the unresolved truths of our shared past? I stood up slowly, the chill of the night seeping into my bones as I gazed at the garden with new eyes, a mixture of sorrow, determination, and an emerging clarity that both terrified and relieved me. I recalled every detail of those eerie nights, the persistent bark echoing into the darkness, the stray collar that had turned up in the park, the deliberate paw prints that had led me on a journey through the labyrinth of our neighborhood. Each element now felt less like a supernatural sign and more like a series of coincidences, intensified by our own emotional vulnerability. At home, the tension had begun to morph into a quiet, desperate kind of resolve. My family, once adrift in a sea of muted despair, started to come together with a shared sense of purpose. Late one evening, after dinner had long gone cold and the house was hushed except for the distant murmur of the city, my father pulled me aside. His voice was low, heavy with the weight of years of unspoken pain. "Maybe," he murmured, "we've been clinging to something that isn't really there. Perhaps it's our grief, twisting our memories." His words struck me deeply, and I realized that in our desperate attempt to hold on to Max, our beloved companion, we had inadvertently transformed our sorrow into an unyielding apparition that haunted our every moment. That night, as I sat alone in the attic with only the soft hum of the radiator for company, I leafed through old photographs and journals, searching for any hint of a time when life had been simpler, when Max's presence had been a source of comfort rather than the beginning of this endless enigma. Among the faded images of family outings and candid smiles, I discovered a forgotten diary entry penned by my mother, detailing a moment of unexpected hope after Max's passing, a day when the world, despite its harshness, seemed to promise that even in loss, there was a chance for rebirth. It was a bittersweet reminder that the past was not a chain to shackle us, but a tapestry of moments that could teach us how to move forward. Emboldened by that quiet revelation, I decided it was time to face our shared memories directly. One morning, I gathered my family in the garden, a place of mourning that had gradually become a crucible for our deepest emotions, and we sat together on a weathered bench under the canopy of a sprawling oak. There were no dramatic speeches, no declarations of finality, just a gentle, honest conversation in which each of us recounted our recollections of Max, both the joyful and the sorrowful. In that exchange, the spectral lines of our grief began to blur, revealing that our persistent fixation on a mysterious return was perhaps a manifestation of a collective longing for what had been lost, and a desperate need to honor every facet of our memories. As the sun climbed higher, its rays piercing through the morning mist, I found that the oppressive aura of the past was slowly lifting. The disturbed soil in the garden, once a symbol of our unresolved torment, now appeared as nothing more than earth reclaiming its space, silent, unyielding, and indifferent to the weight of our emotions. The chilling events of the previous nights, with their uncanny details and unsettling coincidences, had gradually been reinterpreted as manifestations of our inner turmoil. The stray collar, the deliberate paw prints, the haunting figure in the alley, they were not supernatural agents determined to upend our reality, but rather poignant echoes of our own inner conflicts, urging us to reconcile with the pain of loss. In the final days of that turbulent chapter, I returned once more to the park where my journey had taken such unexpected turns. The familiar paths, now bathed in the honest light of midday, seemed to carry no malice, only the quiet dignity of nature continuing its unceasing cycle of renewal. I walked slowly, allowing each step to carry away a fragment of the fear that had so long gripped me. And as I reached the secluded courtyard with its silent fountain, I paused to reflect on the cascade of events that had upended our lives. The stagnant water in the fountain, once a mirror for our haunted reflections, now shimmered in the sun as a testament to the passage of time and the inevitability of healing. I felt an inner calm that had eluded me for weeks, the stark realization that the true mystery had never been about Max's return. It had been about our inability to let go, our unwillingness to accept that the process of mourning, however painful, was also a necessary path to healing. The intensity of our emotions had transformed everyday events into harbingers of dread, twisting the mundane into a landscape of distorted memories. By confronting our grief, by speaking the unspeakable truths that had lingered in the silence of our home, we began to reclaim our narrative. In the days that followed, life resumed its quiet rhythm. The stray collar, which once carried an ominous weight, was placed in a small wooden box on our mantel as a cherished reminder of a beloved friend. The garden, where we had once felt the presence of an otherworldly force, became a place of reflection, a sanctuary where we could remember Max not as an enigma, but as the loyal companion who had filled our lives with simple, unconditional love. Even the park, with its winding paths and forgotten corners, returned to being a space of solace rather than suspicion. Looking back, I understand now that the strange events were not meant to be a puzzle with a neat solution, but a mirror reflecting the complexities of our human experience. Our journey through the murky waters of grief, memory, and the ever-persistent echoes of loss taught us that some mysteries are not meant to be unraveled by logic alone. They must be embraced as part of the tapestry of life, a blend of sorrow and joy, of the mundane and the inexplicable, woven together by the delicate threads of our shared humanity. In the quiet aftermath of that storm of emotions, I learned to see the beauty in the broken, the poetry in the pain. Our family, once fractured by the weight of unspoken fears, found solace in our unity, and in the shared understanding that healing does not come from denying the past, but from accepting it as a necessary chapter in the larger story of our lives. Max's story, with its provocative twists and unsettling echoes, ultimately became a catalyst for transformation, a reminder that even in the wake of profound loss, there lies the potential for growth, redemption, and a deeper appreciation for the fleeting, fragile nature of our existence. Standing in the garden one late afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed everything in a soft, forgiving glow, I felt a gentle resolve settling in my heart. The garden, the park, and even the narrow, forgotten alleys of our neighborhood had all borne witness to our journey, a journey marked not by the supernatural, but by the raw, unfiltered emotions of a family determined to reclaim their life from the grip of unyielding grief. With every whispered memory of Max, every tear shed in silence, we had slowly begun to mend the broken pieces of our hearts. In that profound moment of acceptance, I understood that our story was not defined by a single, inexplicable event, but by the resilience of the human spirit, the capacity to find light in the darkest of times, to forge meaning out of pain, and to honor the past without being shackled by it. As I left the garden and stepped back into the familiar embrace of my home, I carried with me the quiet certainty that our journey, however fraught with sorrow and uncertainty, had also been a path toward healing. And in that healing, there was a promise that even when the echoes of loss resound with unbearable intensity, the gentle cadence of hope will always find a way to speak, softly, into the silence. The final chapter of this ordeal was not marked by a dramatic revelation or an otherworldly encounter, but by the simple, profound act of letting go. In releasing our fears and embracing the bittersweet symphony of our memories, we discovered that the truest form of love endures not in the clamor of unanswered questions, but in the quiet moments of understanding that emerge when the heart is finally ready to forgive the past and welcome the promise of a new day.